Began my new role in Sheridan Public Schools as the Chief Academic Officer in July. And so busy building, a little bit building the plane while we're flying it with a district strategic plan and everything that comes with that. I have an amazing, here in Denver, we call them specialists. In Sheridan, we call them teachers on special assignment, TOSAs. I've got an amazing TOSA team that we work collaboratively in order to be super strategic about implementing supports for schools, leaders, teachers, students, and we also need to progress monitor our work and make sure that it's as effective as it can be.
So you had to, in a way, start building things from the ground up?
Correct.
That's so you as well, because you are a visionary, but you're also very hands-on. Mm-hmm. You are a doer. You like to get things done.
I do.
I do remember that of you when we would work together. You always wanted to have a deadline. You always wanted to know if it was realistic or how it was applicable and the likelihood of that being done without, trying to predict what were the possible hurdles that we will overcome. So that's kind of how your brain works.
It does.
So it's pretty cool. It's pretty cool to have that kind of mindset when you're implementing a new vision, because it's not only, like you said, about the accountability, it's also about, okay, well, we're doing this together. Mm-hmm. So let's figure this out. No, we're going to revisit that on a weekly basis.
And so I don't think that it's like that resistance is definitely not the word I would use. It's more, oh, we're doing this and you're here doing it with me. Like, oh, like almost surprise.
This is your first or second year as the Chief Academic Officer?
No, sir. It feels like 2 years, but it's only my seventh month.
Seventh month.
Mm-hmm.
Oh my God. Mm-hmm. This is your 7th month as the Chief Academic Officer. But your trajectory as a leader, as an educator, goes way back.
It does, yeah.
I'm very curious to hear who was that little Vero as a kid, all the way up until becoming the Chief Academic Officer of the Sheridan Public Schools District. I wonder if you can just give us a picture, a story of who you are.
Yeah, I'm just thinking about a little pin that Nadia Madan Morrow gave me that is a little salt. So, and it says salty. It's a little salero. And
Shout out to you, Nadia, by the way.
Yay,
I love you,
thank
lady.
you. I still love that. And I love you. And I think that I've always been a little salty. And growing up, I was born in Laredo, Texas, which is very, very south Texas. So far south that literally you get there and your cell phone says, "Welcome to Mexico."
Really?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. And so I was born and raised my formative years in a monolingual Spanish-speaking culture. When I was in between my kindergarten and first grade year, my family moved outside of Boulder, Colorado.
How old were you?
I was going into first grade.
Okay.
And I did not know one word of English. And so I was used to all brown all around. I was used to very non-diverse.
Right.
All brown. All Spanish. And I moved I was the only brown kid. I was the only kid that didn't speak English. And that was in the days of sink or swim, right? There was no ELD. There was no any support. So I went through a good 6-7 months of that silent period that I didn't want to speak because I didn't want to get it wrong. I didn't know what I was saying. I was just trying to figure things out in my head, and everywhere from the culture to the language to what I was learning to kid rules, all of this stuff.
First grader.
Yeah.
I mean, little kid.
Yeah, I was littles. And so, my mom even took me to the doctor. And she's like, my daughter won't speak, and I'm like, I just don't want to get anything wrong. I don't know what I'm saying, so I just didn't speak. So that's my why for education, is because I wanted to make sure that kids like me were always supported. So that's always been my why. And additionally, growing up throughout my entire education, I never saw anyone who looked like me as a teacher or as a leader. So that's I guess a secondary why.
I was looking at current. Well, actually, not that current. I think the data I was looking at was from 2017 CDE data. And DPS, as we know, has over half of its population is Latino and minorities, but about 70% of its teachers are white people. So the years have gone by since you were a little kiddo, but the challenge continues.
It does.
So I'm so glad that you are now in this awesome position where you can also be a model to future Latino leaders, females, or whoever identifies with you. I'm very curious to ask you this because when I think of you, I think of somebody who is an extrovert, outspoken, confident, generous, kind, funny, spontaneous. There are so many things about your personality that are so Vero. Like, this is Vero. And I really, really enjoy that. And it inspires me also to be me. Like, when I see you being you, I'm like, yeah, it is okay for everybody to express who they are with love and joy. What kind of lived experiences do you have growing up that kind of set you up to have that saltiness that you have now?
I mean, I don't know if they're that's a really hard question. I don't know if they're experiences and or like my role models, right? Like my grandmother, like my aunts, right? Like donde yo no puedo ser yo, no prefiero no estar. To a certain extent, of course, we all have our,
Of course.
boundaries, but I think my lived experiences that make me who I am really come from my role models and my family. And also my lived experience of observing people who aren't usually their true authentic selves and the toll that takes on them and the people around them isn't a positive one.
Yeah. What do you observe when you see people not being themselves?
Body language is very closed, not very productive. Not very productive in every sense, I guess, right? Not very productive in, how, like you said, I like to get stuff done.
Yeah.
So that, because I feel like they're holding back, and not very productive in relationship building. And because if you can't be yourself, then how can you truly build authentic relationships?
That is such a good point, because I have observed similar traits in people who have difficulties expressing themselves. There is also an overall energy of unhappiness as well.
I know, it's so sad.
Isn't it? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's this overall energy of, I guess I have to be here, or I guess I have to do this and that. And typically when people have difficulties not being themselves, they settle for jobs they don't want or for relationships that might not be to their best interest. It's rough.
Yeah. I think that's a really key word, that they settle.
Yeah.
When we can't be ourselves, I feel like we settle for less.
Yeah.
And that's sad.
That is so cool that you had those role models early on, because I assume your abuelita was probably one of those people.
Tremenda.
Yeah. Why? How was she? Tremenda?
I'm going to say she is the strongest person that I've ever known. Not just like a woman, but she was just strong.
Chingona.
Oh my God. Big time. And I think through her lived experiences, orphaned at 3rd grade, lived with her much older sister and their family, stopped going to school, but always made the most of every situation, always made sure her family was taken care of, always made sure that everybody looked their best, and always had a good time.
That's phenomenal.
Yeah.
Was she married, or she had to do it by herself?
My abuelito, yeah. They were married for close to 60 some years.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's phenomenal. Is she still with you guys?
No, she passed 4 years ago.
4 years ago.
Yeah.
So going back to your story, you were in DPS for over a decade.
23 years altogether.
what did you do in 23 years?
What did I do? Good Lord. I was interventionist, science teacher, SAL, dean, student advisor, assistant principal, coordinator at Central for the then ELA, now MLA department, manager, and then director in the MLA department. Oh, and then I decided to take the leap, and best decision ever, and directly support school leaders as instructional superintendent.
Which was also very courageous given the time where you decided to make that call. Because it was in the middle of, towards the end of the in the middle of the pandemic, 2021 to 22, right? Mm-hmm. So not only you took the leap of taking that leadership role, you also understood that the leadership that was required at that time was a very special kind of leadership. As you look back at all those years, are you able to pinpoint those attributes of best leadership that you have been able to learn and reflect on?
Yes, I have just been so fortunate to have so many different perspectives and experiences. And through each, I've learned so much. So of what a great leader, the attributes of a great leader and the attributes of not such a great leader as well. I mean, you learn in each experience. So
I would say some of the strongest lessons I've learned in leadership are from people who model to me how not to do things. That's for sure.
Yeah. Note to self, don't do that. So sorry, the question was attributes of a good leader?
Yeah. From your own experience.
Courageous, communicative, transparent, collaborative, and this is not a finite list by any means, authentic. Authentic in relationships, authentic in decision-making, authentic in in vulnerability, like when I don't know, I just don't know, and that's okay. That's why you have a team. And someone who creates a culture that it's okay and almost asked to push back, right? So like feedback is okay, even if it's critical feedback, because that's the only way we're going to get better.
When you describe those attributes of a great leader, courageous, communicative, transparent, collaborative, authentic as well, what I also hear in between lines is a little bit of an implicit sense of urgency in the pace in which we need to accomplish things.
Yeah, I think that's where the transparency comes from, like transparent in your communication and your expectations. And I think that urgency would come from that.
Yeah. I assume that those attributes in leadership that you describe are also in relationship to the population we serve. Like the kids need leaders who are courageous, that are able to speak on their behalf, that are able to represent them, that are also able to look with transparency and authenticity what the new needs are and put them on the table so we can dissect them and take care of them. That's very strong leadership, by the way, and I always appreciate that kind of description. What are the equity challenges that you currently are seeing in your new role?
I think that the equity gaps are very similar. If you take a look at the data, very, very similar. The difference is that DPS calls it out, and I really, really appreciate that. And I know that hasn't happened overnight. I know that has been and continues to be a process of growth for everyone and mindset shift for everyone. But what about this specific student? Like, let's take a look at this specific student's data. So I have always appreciated that about DPS. I think that stepping into my new role, that is definitely an opportunity that has begun to be implemented. Again, there are a lot of mindset shifts that are currently in the works. And so I guess one of the differences is that where we are in the journey of mindset shift. I know that we're not all the way there in Denver, and we're just beginning it in my current role. it's like that culture I was talking about earlier. Like, oh, but those are all of our kids. Right. And so the ability to disaggregate the data in order to really hone in on where the gap is for X kid versus Y kid, and then looking at those trends, I think that is just beginning in my current role. Whereas I think you guys in Denver are well on your way to making that that's just what we do. That's just an expectation to take a look at that and address it. Whereas we're just beginning that work.
What are the main systems that you have developed currently that are giving you the biggest bang for the buck in unpacking those inequities?
I think embedding linguistic supports throughout our strategic plan. So regardless of whether it's whole group, small group instruction, regardless of whether it's using assessments to guide your instruction, SEL, regardless of the initiative, language supports are embedded and student discourse are embedded. So I think that's huge considering our MLL population.
So now teachers and school leaders are able to pay attention to the way language is taught and approached in content instruction as a way to address those inequities.
Yes, and I mean, even not taught, right? Like, what percentage of the time was spent with the teacher talking versus the students talking to each other or to the teacher?
When it comes to equity, the allocation of resources is just one piece. The work on the mindsets and our own internal structures on the way we see our kids and the way we do things differently is probably more than half of the work it takes. So
I would say, yeah, probably 80%.
Yeah. With regards to mental health challenges, what do you notice right now this year with your school populations?
I guess I would notice between these, because since this is my first year there, but just comparing mental health of students and staff from here last year versus there this year, I feel like adults are taking advantage more of mental health opportunity, like supports. There's less, it's new to go back to school. Last year everybody was coming out of the pandemic and actually being present physically. And specifically for the early grades, all grades, that was a little hard.
Yeah. That
transition was hard. Behaviorally, emotionally, mental health wise, we had a lot of lift last year. And while I'm not going to say the lift isn't there this year, I don't feel like it's as much.
Okay, this year it's not as much as before. Okay, interesting. Are you guys implementing a social emotional curriculum district-wide?
Yes, we have an SEL screener 3 times a year.
It's not the best.
No, it's not. It's Panorama.
Never heard of it.
And so we're piloting it, getting feedback. I'm not saying that we're like, that's when we're going to use, maybe it is, maybe it's not. We're just right in the middle of it. And so we use that data similar to how DPS does, to determine groups for our mental health teams to pull and support students, as well as SEL curriculum and expectation of 30 minutes a day, SEL curriculum and learning for every building.
First thing in the morning or embedded throughout the day?
It depends on the building, but
Depends.
Our elementary school has it as an elective, actually.
Really?
Yeah, I kind of like it. Yeah.
That's kind of cool. So the kids get to choose if they want to go to that class, or it's just a rotation?
It's a rotation,
So-
just like PE.
Just like PE. I kind of like that too.
Right? Like, it's an expectation. We're going to learn different
And
social,
it's an
emotional.
entire block for you to go and do.
And then you can observe, and then you can progress monitor, and that teacher has, SLOs as well.
I love that, SEL as an elective. Vero, I am curious to know if there were one thing in our current educational system that you would like to see change within your lifetime. What would it be?
I mean, this is pie in the sky, right? Like,
It's pie in the sky. The first step towards making things happen and to bringing change is to imagine it, right?
yeah, to envision it, and my mind goes to those those systems of inequity that a lot of times well-educated PhDs in education don't see because that's the way it's always been, right? We don't actively kind of dismantle or analyze the systems that we're working in for those inequities that we're accidentally perpetuating. So I don't know if it's as simple as, we need more educators of color, because sometimes educators of color, like myself, we were born and raised in the system. So do we even realize that we're perpetuating? So I guess it would be understanding, for everyone to understand that this system was not made for students of color to succeed. And so if we understand that, then how do we actively analyze these systems to dismantle it so it can work for everyone? Super simple, right?
Yeah.
That's all. That's all we need.
There's a lot to unpack in those few sentences you said. And I honestly have been thinking about it for forever. It's not the people of color, or it's not the people who we put in front of the kids necessarily. It's about the system itself that uses any kind of people to perpetuate itself. Mm-hmm. So we could be Latinos or Black of Native American people in front of our kids, but if we're embedded in the system, we will perpetuate it as well as anybody else. So,
without actively embedding equity pauses, whatever you want to call it, within every protocol or meeting that we run, right? Like, is this new program, or is this new Saturday thing, or is this new... What about it is perpetuating systems of inequity? And that into itself is, a 2-day long conversation just for any one process that we do.
When you think of systems of inequity, where do you put standardized testing? I go back and forth all the time. Like, I could give you my opinion right now, and tomorrow might be different. And I keep reading, I keep researching, and some days I just don't know what to do with it or what to do of it.
What do you feel is the purpose of standardized testing?
I love how you turned the question on.
Plot twist.
Thank you for putting me on the spot. In the most basic sense, standardized testing, it is intended to measure students' academic readiness, either for their next grade level or for college and career.
Based on what?
On their ability to take a test and pass it, right?
And that ability to take a test is based on?
Well, the most basic ability that they will have to take the test will be the knowledge they have acquired throughout the year. So if they're taking let's stick with elementary. If they're taking CMAS or CSLA or math, the degree to which they will be successful, and we're saying successful by showing grade level performance, right? It will be based on whether or not they were taught the content they were supposed to know in order to say what they were supposed to say and think the way they were supposed to think with those critical thinking skills to give the answer that they're expected to give. I don't know if you notice on my tone a little bit of, but I have to say it, right? Like we have to grapple with it so we can come up with something different or to understand why it exists.
Right, and your initial question was my stance on standardized tests and equity.
Where would you put standardized testing within the equity piece?
And I turned it around on you because if you drill that down to systems of inequity, you said expect. Well, whose expectation is it? And based on what? And it's based on right? The standards, that is, I'm going to unpack it even further. Who makes the standards?
Yeah. I mean, or how is the test designed?
Right. And so while I feel like, I guess it goes back to the purpose of the assessment for me, and standardized testing, I feel like it can give us a lot of information, and if you drill it down, it definitely is part of the system of inequity, right? Because our newcomers, so does that mean that they don't have anything to offer? Does that mean that they don't know anything? No, that's not at all. But it kind of messages that without, not unintentionally.
Right.
Gives that message. I mean, I am data driven, you know this. And again, back to that kind of like that area of feeling stuck between we operate and live in this system, and we use what we use what we're supposed to use. And how can we, in a balanced way, also push other people's thinking to like, that's not all this student knows. The student is not defined by this one score.
Right. I've been thinking seriously a lot about this. And when we think of standardized assessment, I think of the two words. I think of standardize and I think of assessment, right? So if we talk about assessment without the word standardize, we continuously assess our kids, right? We do formative and summative assessments. You know the LEAP framework very well, which is something we use in Denver public schools. There is one indicator that is checks for understanding. Checks for understanding are assessments.
Absolutely.
And those are assessments that you are encouraged to do multiple times during the day to make sure that the kids are making progress towards mastery of the standard, the skill, conceptual, or whatever understanding you want them to have. So when we look at assessments without the word standard, we know that it is embedded in everything we do.
It should be.
And it is not only embedded, it appears to be necessary. Right? If I'm developing my lesson, if I am working on this group of students, I need to know by assessing them whether or not I am reaching to them and helping them unpack their full potential, whether it is through a fractions lesson or the rainforest, right? So the assessment itself appears to be a necessary item that we need to have in our toolbox when we teach our kids. Formative, summative on a daily basis, every 5 minutes at the end of a lesson in the form of an exit ticket as an oral response for our multilingual learners. Now when we come to the word standardize, it's when I start also to think about the word standardize outside of education. And we look at what other things are standardized in our society that in fact are beneficial to us. Well, you have to take a standardized driving test in order to be trusted with a car on the street. You're supposed to take a standardized cholesterol assessment at the doctor.
Are you?
Technically, at least every 2 years. You're supposed to, I don't know, I started thinking of everything is filled with standardized stuff. If you're going to become a principal, a teacher, a superintendent, a nurse, a plumber, an engineer, everything appears to have a bar that you have to hit in order to be considered qualified to perform the duties that you want to perform, period. So when we look at standardized stuff, it happens in society all throughout. The problem I see, I think you agree with me, but I still want to put it out there to see if you can enrich my perspective. The problem I see with the word standardize is that when it comes to our kids, is that we assume that the conditions every kid is setting them up to hit the standardized bar. So if my own kids, if they have a mom and a dad that are college educated and that can help them do homework at home, I have no problem, and in fact, I have confidence that they're going to hit that standardized bar. But when I have a full array of conditions, the expectation that every kid is going to naturally hit this bar of standardized assessment at the end of 184 days of school, when this kid has moved 3 times from one house to the other and then now is sleeping on a tent or in the back of a car or blah, 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 blah. We know all the conditions. I do question the functionality of a standardized assessment when we already know what the assessment is going to tell us about the kids we serve. Then I become cynical. Like, does that mean that I am already giving up on these kids? And does that mean that now I know that what's the point of me teaching them to the test because I already know they cannot do it? Or should I be more optimistic and I should still persist on their ability to take the test? So it takes me 1,000 places because, and it's not only in the US, you know, I'm Venezuelan, but I'm also familiar with the Colombian, Mexico, Argentina, Chile, Spain. I know many other countries that apply standardized assessments in their society, and we have learned to live with it as a measure of competence. Mm-hmm. But I'm grappling with that issue of, I know that the standardized assessment might be an accurate measure of performance for us to continue to have the society working. But the issue is, yeah, man, but these kiddos, I mean, what if he or she is going to be the most amazing chef?
Right.
Or, you know,
electrician.
A professional mountain biker, or there are so many things that go unmeasured in a standardized test that worries me if we are putting all the eggs on one basket. And beyond that, we're allocating resources to schools, districts, and zip codes in relationship to those standardized scores. So I don't know. That's a big rant from my side. I'm sorry. You're the one who's supposed to be talking. But it just fires me up.
Yeah, I agree. And I do also grapple with, I know this student and their family. I know their story. I know that they've got not the ideal conditions, right? And so, but again, I'm going back to mindset. And when you said if you can envision it, it'll happen. So we can never say the student's never going to make that mark, because I feel like then we're limited. We're going to make that happen, right? And so we need to give the students every possibility, every opportunity to. And so that's where, you know, our teachers come in to play. Well, always, but, you know, our support of the teachers, our learning cycles with teachers, our data digs with teachers. And you guys do this very well. Let's take a look at the growth in between. So maybe the student isn't exactly meeting that mark, but where was he or she last time? Where are they now? What did we do in between? And really get analytical with the supports for the teacher and the specific intentional instructional moves for that student to see growth. Because I feel like as long as they're growing, you know, that's the positive end. That's the positive way to go. That's where we need to go, the growth. And if we keep on growing, eventually they'll get there. And believe me, if there was a standardized test for mountain biking, there would be.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Damn, it's so complex. It's so complex. I've been reading a lot of the origins of standardized assessments in the U.S. and how it was almost eugenics. What's the word?
I don't know.
Based on race. To keep the racism, the racist origins of standardized testing. They are compelling arguments to explain why standardized assessments has racist origins. But I've been grappling with the idea of maybe it's not racist, maybe it's socioeconomics. And everybody who's poor and everybody who has an intergenerational history of being outside of the privileged circle will continue to be on the outskirts, whether you have a different skin color. But I need to study more.
I don't disagree. I think it's much more complex than just race. I do think that it is a combination of race, class, and gender. If you're a white male, I'm going to say a straight white male in the 7th grade versus, you know, a poor white straight male. I mean, what advantages does one have versus the other? And how, I mean, I would love to see the data between like how one performs on a standardized assessment versus the other, because who is that standardized assessment made for?
I would say the standardized assessment is made for every kiddo that has enough resources to develop
and language,
including language as a resource, right? That has enough resources, language, and opportunities to see a standardized assessment as a test of what they know. Because if you're going to give me a test on things that I know, I'm going to be excited, I'm going to knock it out of the park, and I'm going to be looking forward to the next one, baby.
Yeah.
You know? But
Yeah.
if you're going to give me a standardized assessment and I don't know what's going to be on it.
Or that has questions that of privilege that only folks of privilege would know have the background knowledge for. Even the context of it, right? If it's something around the beach or something, something that's not urban. Come on, Pearson.
Passionate. Yeah, I know. Anybody, whoever is listening that's passionate about this topic and want to chime in and just join us in a conversation, I would love to have you, because if we're not talking about this, who is? If we are not the ones, and I am not, again, I want to educate myself as much as I can on this topic, because I am not fully against or fully in favor. And that's why I find it problematic, because the people that I love and respect, especially in the context of Denver public schools, there are people who are fully against it. And when I listen to them carefully, they make sense. But I always wonder if we're leaving pieces outside of the conversation, and we're not looking at the whole data or at the whole purpose of what standardized assessments are. Again, I'm Venezuelan. I am familiar with many other structures of standardization of assessments and performance. And that's why I want to just engage in offering different perspective, because I also see my babies and watching them not being at grade level, year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4, year 5, year 6, then leaving us and then going there and not being at grade level. And then they're 17 and they're like, what the hell do I do with my life? That is real. Mm-hmm. This was a lot of fun.
It was so much fun. Thank you.
Thank you, mi Vero. I hope we can do this again.
Me too.
I hope in the future we can bring more people. If you want to bring somebody from your team, and we can just give an update of the leadership and the vision that you're developing at your place. I think that would be fantastic.
That would be great.
Yeah.
I would really appreciate more time with you. I love CMS.
Yeah,
love hanging out with you.
Thank you. Well, this is your home, and hopefully we can see each other again.
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you, mi Vero.
Thank you.